So I feel like at a premise, we can all very strongly agree that shame has power.
Shame has a lot of power.
Shame has a lot of power. And we can all very strongly agree that that power can go bad. You can over shame yourself. And I think what you're saying is that shame isn't good at all. No shame at all.
You should feel shame when you do wrong. And you genuinely, like, there are times when you should feel ashamed.
Yes.
Because there's no other, like, true emotion to feel.
But you don't like shame as a matter of creating discipline.
No. And I feel like people a lot of times just create shame in their lives to, like, be like, oh, well, I can see myself, you know, in the future doing so much better than this. So, like, what I have now is shameful. And, like, I should do better to reach this goal that I'm imagining in the future. Yeah. And I think that is extremely useful for getting to that future point and, you know, creating, I mean, usually shame in the context we're talking about is work related, or it's, you know, just some goal you want to achieve and you're kind of having to use shame to motivate, you know, to get there. But I think that totally discounts the whole point of, like, the bigger picture of life. I feel like people aren't zooming out enough when they're getting into that sort of space. So it's useful, but I feel like it's really easy to lose your direction and then, like, not understand how to be happy anymore. And it's different for different people. It's just like, I just know it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. And I get that. It definitely is different for different people. But I think the purpose of life in a lot of ways is to zoom in. And shame shouldn't be your only tool of discipline. Shame should be a tool kind of used with rewarding yourself. Rewarding yourself is a huge tool. And, like, if you're training yourself, we're so much more complex than dogs. But, like, there's times where you need a thump on the nose in life when you do something wrong, or kind of the mindset going in. Like, if you're planning on if you want to work out 4 times a week or 3 times a week and you don't hit that, you shouldn't shame yourself if you are really busy and you have a lot going on. Shame isn't the best motivator for that to keep you going. But if you were just sitting on the couch, scrolling through your phone and not doing that, you should experience a bit of shame.
Well, yeah, because that goes back to our conversation where at that point you're just not doing your best. I feel like sometimes people are doing their best and are still shaming themselves even when they're doing their best. And that's where I feel like people can get lost. And it's just this, like, cycle and loop where you shame yourself even though you're doing your best, and that shame actually creates positive results in the future for the stuff that you want to achieve. And you're like, oh, okay, this now is just the way I feel. And it's not like you're doing it on purpose. It's just a learned habit to shame yourself.
Yeah, and then you're kind of generalizing the tool of shame. I agree. Super powerful. It can be used incorrectly. But I think for me, I need a teeny bit of shame in my life. Shame keeps you in check. It's important check and balance in my life, because there's confidence that goes up way too high sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes my self-confidence skyrockets to the point where I get a bit egotistical, or I get a bit narcissistic, and then shame's going to bring me back down to that point. I shouldn't let shame just tumble me down. And that's why, I mean, I've said this 1 trillion times, is that I love myself and I can't let shame do that to me. So I've stopped letting shame do that to me.
Which I definitely think is, like, healthy. Like, that's a good relationship with it, as long as you're having to love yourself in the background. And I don't think what I'm speaking to even necessarily applies to your version of shame. But I know there's people out there who never have the love yourself part of it. And they're always using it as
just shame. Yeah.
Yeah. As a shame to, like, that's their motivator to keep going. And maybe they do love themselves too. But it's mostly work related also. It's, like, almost purely, you know, talking about work related.
It's discipline in, like, an industrial society.
Yeah. And I think over time that just builds callous. Like, that builds a level of callous where you start to lose connection with your own, like, I just think you lose connection with your own happiness over time. I think people underestimate as you get older how much your brain starts to learn the mode that you're in every day. And if the mode that you're in every day is, like,
punishment, you're punishing yourself every day. Creates callous. It creates emotional issues. It makes it hard for you to accept compliments and take that reward.
Yeah. And it makes it hard for you to connect with other, like, people's emotions too. Like, I think people underestimate how much your brain starts to get, you know, solidified as you get older, and you'll forget who you were and what made you happy, you know, 10 years before. And we're just not at that stage yet in life. We're not at the age where we have the perspective to go, will like, oh, I've completely lost what makes me happy. But I
Yeah.
definitely don't know what made me happy 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And it's possible that that thing back then is like really the core of it, but who knows? But the big thing is when you get older, you just don't want to get to a spot where you don't know what happiness is anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's just important to not, you know, I just don't think you need to be shaming yourself that much. I think if you really like the stuff you're doing, you don't need any shame to do really well in it. And if you're having to shame yourself to get through the process, like maybe you should be trying to figure out, what you can do where you don't have to do that.
Mhm.
I don't know.
I can get behind a lot of what you're saying, but I think there's a flip side of this, which is important to analyze. There's people that are rewarding themselves way too much anytime they do anything right,
Mm-hmm.
or when they don't do anything right at all, they constantly reward themselves, and then the whole system gets fucked.
Yeah, you don't want to constantly reward yourself either. That's like the other side of the coin from shame. Like you don't
Mhm.
want to be over negative, and you also definitely don't want to be over positive. I really do feel like the best descriptor is just, do your best and be content with what like your best is.
Mhm.
Because your best is still going to make progress. Like your best is always going to get better as long as you're doing your best.
Yeah, and best I think is a matter of effort though, but like the matter of like reinforcing behavior, because if best is behavior, right?
Mhm.
If you want to reinforce that behavior, I think the two things we're using are shame and we're using positive reinforcement. But then technically you can get into like operant conditioning, which is taking away the shame,
Mhm.
taking away that positive reinforce, taking away that like that treat.
I just don't even think you need the treat either. I mean, I guess I'm only speaking from, again, personal experience here, but like I don't need treats to make me feel like I did good. Like I'm just happy with what I do because I feel like I try my best and I put effort into it,
Mhm.
and I don't, I like
There's
I don't
intrinsic
neglect
reward.
things that I know I shouldn't be neglecting.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's an intrinsic reward where I just feel good about myself.
Yeah, but
I always like,
I totally agree. That's a treat though. That's an intrinsic reward. I mean, it's not like literally buying yourself something
but
on
it's
Amazon
a treat
or
that
like
lasts
treat.
all day, like every day.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a positive reinforcement. A treat,
Yeah.
a treat was just a word I was
Yeah,
using
yeah.
because it's something you give to reinforce behavior.
Yeah.
Something that's kind of naturally happening to reinforce behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that way it is. It's like a nice subtle treat that is a prolonged one. But
Yeah.
I don't think is harmful. Where I think sometimes treats like at some point are like, well, what's like, what are you really doing here?
Yeah, because intrinsic reward, I mean, that's almost, I mean, I'm sure there's a way to corrupt intrinsic reward, but I think in general, like if you're getting intrinsic reward from
Mhm.
something, you shouldn't feel bad that you're getting intrinsic reward.
Definitely. I think the only time it can get corrupted is if you are, not understanding that you still have an infinite amount of work left. Where it's like, I always understand at the core of it that, yeah, I have to always be doing better and like my best can always be better.
Mhm.
If I was rewarding myself from like, oh yeah, like I'm just sick with it right now and like I'm the best I can be, that's not good.
Mhm.
Because then that's definitely hampering your progress.
But in terms of looking back like 10 years in the past and thinking like that's where like true joy is or could be, the true joy is probably always in the moment. And I feel like you're never at a point where that's too far gone. There's a point where you have built a lot of bad habits and you lose your mental plasticity to change them. But I think you can always experience that joy and you can always try to ground yourself in the moment. And just because you lose that plasticity and you lose that flexibility, there's still changes you can make in your life, but just the amount of effort it takes to like change those habits when you're older, definitely, yeah. You change also your viewpoints, because
Yeah.
I feel like older people, they get very entrenched in their viewpoints.
Yeah. And you're definitely right that it's always accessible 100%, no matter what, as old as you get, it is always accessible. It's always there. I think people just forget to realize or like self-reflect and realize that it is accessible.
Mhm.
Which is just a weird spot to get to. It's hard to understand, I still think, at our age, but it's like I talk to people that are older that I work with that's like, whoa, like you've completely lost the sense that you could just choose to like be, feeling great right now
Mhm.
and being like, yep, I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm like doing the best in my scenario. Like life's still really good and I
Yeah.
can find joy in this moment.
And there's a lot of old people that do that. They find joy in the moment and they have this wonderful life and ability to change. But I feel not because they've always had the ability to change, but that's just something that they work on.
Mm-hmm.
And they try not to kind of grow. And I feel like we're all going to run into this problem.
Yeah.
Like, as you get older, you're going to find yourself trenches in life. And I find myself in little trenches in my life compared to when I was younger. And then you're going to have to find a way to break out of those trenches or to be able to leave that trench on occasion and come back to it later.
Yeah.
And that comes right back into like the discipline of like, I want to do this. I want to work. I want to go really hard after this and keep on achieving. But when you dig that trench 3 miles down the road, you've left like your family in the past, or you've left your relationships in the past and all that.
It's definitely work to not dig that trench too deep. I think that's an important thing, a piece of advice I would say going forward for anybody is to, I guess that's the shame thing, is like, just keep the bigger perspective in picture too.
Yeah.
You know, if the shame thing works for you, that's awesome. As long as you can still take the step back and go like, okay, well, the big picture is like, you know, there's always still like, this moment's still kind of where it's at. Like, I shouldn't feel shame in the moment always.
And I mentioned athletes earlier, off camera, but I think it's really interesting because they have perhaps an unhealthy relationship with shame, and almost a different thing is like the chip on your shoulder. I wouldn't know what to describe that as, because that's not shame. That's not self-doubt. They have like almost overconfidence where they think they're the best. Yeah. But as an athlete at the pro level, you have to think you're the best. You have to have that, like, it's almost belligerent in a way.
The pride?
A bit of pride.
I think it's also weirdly insecurity too. Like the chip on the shoulder thing is an insecure thing. And you mask it with massive security, which usually works.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
if you think you're the best, you're probably gonna be really, really good.
Yeah, like Michael Jordan had a massive chip on his shoulder, and anytime he'd build up, but there's anger to it.
There's anger,
and that's also the thing, is he's so far down this trench he's built in life, and it's a really sick trench, or it's a really sick path that he's built. Like, being a pro athlete at that level is amazing.
Yeah,
but there's toxicity in it. And once you leave the sport, you realize that you can't treat everybody that same way. Yeah. Like Mike Tyson had all those years where he had to like ramp himself down because he would like build himself up, and his ego was crazy, but also this like the fire inside him to fight. Yeah. Like life, you shouldn't be fighting outside of actually fighting. So it's like, it's funny how those little motivators for discipline, like, yeah, you could go really far in like your industrial society with them. But then if you take a step back, like holistically, you're like, whoa, I was like whipping myself in the back to like try to achieve this goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's super powerful. And I think it's really addicting to get into that trench where you're like, this is working. Like this, like the way this motivating factor is like making me the best, and feeling the best is going to like, or feeling like the best is going to make you feel like the best just in life too. And be like, yeah, I'm just as good as I can possibly be. But you're just not always that guy.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
Okay.
Okay?
Are you?
Absolutely.
It's like, there's just no way you can always be that person. It's like, it's not really what it's about. But I don't know. It's their experience too. I'm like, maybe it is what it's about. And like, that's such a unique life perspective that, and it's there's still value in going down that road.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing. They're moving in a very specific direction. I think there's a lot of value to it. Maybe it's not all about maximizing efficiency, and that's what people do with shame and with those tools. I think we agree in the end though. I mean, shame doesn't specifically work for you, you'd say?
Yeah, it doesn't specifically work for me, and it definitely is just different for all people. It just depends like what vibe you want to kind of run with in life. Because I guess my thing is, I'm not chasing huge achievement. I'm just chasing like personal fulfillment. So to me, the shame has no value. But I feel like it's important that, or I feel like everybody's taught that you need to be chasing huge achievement to like, you know, feel really fulfilled. I'm just like, that's just not necessary. But if that's like your dream, then do it. Then it's like, do whatever it takes to go do that, if that's the thing you're committed to.
Yeah, I think recently I've been feeling like, maybe not huge achievement, but like chasing achievement. It's like the pursuit of happiness, you know, like it'll be there for a second once you get that intrinsic reward, but then it kind of goes away. I've been feeling recently like that movement's kind of brought me a lot of happiness, but I also get what you're saying, where being still, like if like you're on a map and you're just kind of being still and you're not really putting effort into like any specific direction, but you're just being, that's mindfulness and that's presentness. And there is a lot of fulfillment within that. I agree.
Yeah. And then when you get too stagnant in that, like when I do feel shame is if you get too stagnant, then the shame will creep in, rightfully so. and be like, hey, get your ass in gear a little bit. You got to do more than this.
So you feel shame, but you're not actively whipping yourself with shame.
No, never whipping myself with shame. I just see other people be so like not happy day to day. I'm like, there's just no reason to beat yourself up about these things.
And I find also when you let go of the whip, that the good, positive, intrinsic reward will also come back. Because if you keep on whipping yourself, like you said, you'll become calloused.
Yeah.
So if you let go of that, more self-love will kind of creep into that whole equation. And then you won't ever really pick up the whip again, but that natural shame will come in and be extremely useful.
Yeah. It'll keep you in check when you need it, but then you'll still just do your best because you're like, oh, I'm just happy. Like I'm like trying to do better because that's like the right thing to do.
Where do you guys land on guilt?
Guilt versus shame. I think they're pretty similar. Do you think there's a difference between the two?
I assume guilt involves another party, I guess would be the distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Because you can shame someone else, but that's more of like an action you do onto another.
Right.
But to guilt is something like, oh, I told Zella I was going to call her at 10 o'clock and it didn't happen. Now I feel guilty.
Right.
I think.
What time is it?
Yeah, exactly. The guilt one is one that I would hope that people don't just impart guilt on their own life. That's definitely not healthy. Like guilt more so than shame, I feel like should be a reactionary thing.
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to feel guilty because I did this action.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's the difference.
Mm.
I feel like shame, you can create a feeling of shame. You can create a feeling of guilt too. But I feel like guilt is because it has to involve another party. It's something that should probably be paid attention to. Like, if shame might not always be valid to latch onto. You may feel shame sort of wrongfully at yourself. If you're feeling guilty about something, there's probably some grain of truth there as to why you're feeling guilty.
But then I think there's also like a big problem with like toxic relationships is like people can like gaslight you and make you feel guilty.
True.
And realistically, sometimes you're not doing things wrong.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it where it like guilt can be weaponized. Whoa.
Yeah, it definitely can. You kind of have to be able to stand behind your own actions. I feel like to not feel super guilty. Like I don't really feel guilty about much almost ever just because I guess I know my own intentions. But I think that's a lot of times could be naive on my part. But knowing why you do things, I feel like is a good way to keep yourself out of guilt. You got to be able to explain to yourself why you're doing your actions. And if you have no explanation and somebody else is like, well, why are you doing this? Kind of hard to get the guilt out.
Yeah. But I think you could also feel guilty for the outcome and not just intentions. And as long as your guilt doesn't eat you away, I think there's healthy guilt.
Yeah.
And that mirrors fear. Like I think all three of them as a marker of like something might be going on, it's useful. But like excess is always whack. And you lean more on the less is better. And I feel like you lean on like it's there for a reason as long as it's in check.
It's an interesting one. I do wonder how self-centered it is to not have them as very, important markers for myself. Because in my head, I can explain away pretty much all of it and be like, no, I feel really good about myself. I'm like happy with how I make decisions. But that doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean it's always the right thing to feel.
I think what you and me have in common in a lot of ways is that I think we both have a healthy amount. Maybe I don't, but I think there's a healthy amount of selfishness too. If you can be healthy and selfish in that way, you should be. You should be a bit selfish in life. And it's not just taking from others to get what you want, but it's just a matter of like, sometimes you got to put yourself first.
Yeah, you gotta take care of your own energy before you worry too much about other people's energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes even worrying about other people's energy is like out of the equation for me. I'm like, I just can't do that right now.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the times where I'm being overly selfish because I'm putting my energy and my thoughts kind of way above theirs. So that's something I can maybe work on is doing that. But at times, it makes me feel really good.
I know. What's the hard part? It's like, it's hard to want to work on when you can be like, well, it's working out pretty well so far.
It's nice to be a bit emotionally selfish.
Yeah.
But then I think that's then where guilt becomes powerful and a good kind of powerful is when you become emotionally selfish And then guilt will kind of try to pry at those walls, be like, hey man, like, come on.
Yeah, exactly. And if you are emotionally selfish, when the guilt really does creep in, then yeah, it's probably worth paying attention to, because there's a self-awareness there that like, ooh, well, I don't feel guilty very often, but like now I'm feeling guilty.
Yeah,
I'm
dude.
like, now this is something I should probably pay attention to.
Yeah. Most of the time when there's a thought in my brain that's like, you should probably apologize to that person, I listen to that thought, because like I don't get that a lot.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
What do you have to say for yourself, Greg?
Yeah, you got a lot of guilty thoughts in there.
Shame's a circle for a reason. Sometimes it spirals up, sometimes it spirals down. It's a circle.
I know guilt is linked to another word, and I can't remember the word.
Do you feel like you're emotionally selfish at all, or do you feel like you're too far away from being emotionally selfish?
I think when I'm most emotionally selfish is when I'm hungover. If I'm hungover and my stomach like hurts, like I've like done up, that's the only time I can think that I can remember where I'm like 100% me.
That's when Maslow kicks in. You're like, okay, I have to like not be dying first before I can deal with anything else. And so that's super understandable.
Yeah.
Kind of feels good when you're like, oh, this is my priority, and everything can off.
Yeah.
Like my couch could be on fire, and there's points where I'm like, no, unless I'm on fire, I'm sitting here.
Dude, if the stomach hurt, dude, the stomach hurt.
Yes. So do you feel like you're often not your own first priority during the day?
I'm rarely my first priority.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know where it's hard. It's hard to say, because I feel like, me and you are on the same page, where I feel like we are our first priority in the day. But it's really tough to know, as somebody who is that way, if that's like a good way to be, like in terms of relationships to other people. When you wake up, do you start immediately thinking about all the things you need to do for other people that day?
Not the first 5 minutes.
The first 5 minutes.
It's like a slow, they come one by one.
What are you doing those first 5 minutes?
Kind of go back to sleep.
Yeah, it's interesting, 'cause I almost feel like when you don't put yourself as your first priority, it creates a weird looping effect that takes your ability to put yourself as your first priority further away.
Right, you get worse at it.
Well, and you also it also creates interactions with other people in a way where I feel like those other people almost start to be like, oh, yeah, he's going to do this thing for me. Like it creates a relationship where people are actually trying to take more of your energy than if you were just kind of putting yourself as your first priority.
Yeah.
And it kind of, doesn't need to be said, but people sort of understand that it's like, okay, he's going to do his stuff and he'll get to me when he can. It's not like you're going to get to me, like, I need you now. You're going to do it now. Because I feel like you give in to that sometimes.
Yeah. It's like the oxygen mask thing of like, everyone should be putting their own oxygen on first. It's just simple.
Because even if you aren't that crucial to a lot of other people's needs, when people do need you, do you then start to feel like very crucial to it? Where it's like, that is more important. That's like the most important thing.
Yeah, I usually take it more serious than it is. Like, I feel like my responsibility to other people, I put really highly, more than it is, but then the outcome is typically less than is expected.
Yeah. I wonder if it has anything to do with the way that it's framed too. Because I will say that if things are like a job task, you sort of need to own that, right? Or even if it's for somebody else, it's like, well, it's my job. So the putting yourself first is actually doing that thing for another person, but just owning that, like, that's part of what I need to get done.
Yeah. And I think there's also, you can view that as an extension of yourself, because like that's your word, like when you when you make that agreement with someone else, like for me with work, like when I make that agreement, like I feel like that obligation to do it. And I feel like fulfilling that gives me that intrinsic reward, because I start thinking, oh, dude, this is ripping. Like,
yeah,
I'm a man of my word. I'm a hard worker. And I get that intrinsic reward from it. So in part, that is me taking care of myself, is
definitely
tending to the agreements I've made with others.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it.
But the agreement is a good word to have in there, because sometimes it's not an agreement. And when it's not an agreement, when it's like a forceful thing, then it's like, put yourself first, get to that when you can. But like, you're more important. But when you make the verbal agreement to go like, yeah, that sounds good, like we'll do it, whatever way is agreed upon, then that becomes put yourself first and do the work. Like if I'm at work and somebody asks me to do something, that's not my job, like I'm going to get to that when I get to it.
Yeah.
But if it impacts my job directly and I'm like, oh yeah, that's also my thing, then it's like, cool. Like we're going to prioritize that.
Yeah. And I think that's important that's an important thing with communication, is making it clear what you expect from others, but also what others should expect from you. Because I think there's a lot of times where that person's not even being evil and trying to take your energy.
Yeah.
The line just isn't clear. So if you can build the strength to draw that line in the sand sometimes, it's not even building strength. Sometimes you just do it and it just works out fine. You're like, hey, that's not really, well, there's better ways to put it than saying, hey, that's not my job. But being like, we're charging you for 1 hour of editing. Like if you want this, it's more.
Yeah, definitely.
So those strong agreements, I think everyone should respect those. And if anyone gets mad at you drawing a line in the sand at some point, they're probably out of pocket, or you're drawing that line super close to you. And it's like, no, only if it's convenient.
Yeah.
So there is you got to be careful where you draw that line.
Yeah. But I think if there's no line drawn, the natural expectation is almost always more than what's realistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because nobody knows where the end goal is. So the assumed end goal is just like perfection. It's like, no. Perfection's not going to happen. So let's agree upon what we're going to actually, like, what's our goal?
What's deliverable?
Yeah. A lot to learn in life about trying to protect your energy. It's not something that I don't think necessarily comes naturally. It's definitely a learned thing, especially as you start getting older and start interacting with more people that expect more of your energy.
Yeah.
It's a big balance.
It's easy to get swept away in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been like pretty good about it recently. There's still some things that consume my energy, which probably shouldn't. But there's always going to be those things. And I just got to keep on working at them. And then like what you were saying with, you can like work on like a couple things at a time, but the second you stop working on it, it's going to kind of slip away a teeny bit.
I think the entropy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you can control so many things in your life, but then you can't control everything because it's unrealistic.
Yeah.
And the stuff that you're not controlling, like just because of entropy, is going to get further away from what you want it to be. Like as much as you try to set it up so when you're not there, it stays how you want it, it's going to start to be not how you want it. But you just got to be okay with that. It's you'll only be able to touch so many things.
Yeah. I would argue to say, yes, it does become further away from what you want it to be, but not always in the opposite way. It's not always a bad way. Sometimes you leave things be and then you find that maybe that's what was needed.
Yeah, it could definitely evolve in a good way.
Yeah, but it just kind of goes off in random. Maybe not in random. There's probably a reason why.
It goes off of your plan.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean your plan was the best thing.
Yeah.
But it just goes away from, your exact, like your mental model of it.
I'm amazed that you can get back as well as you can sometimes. Like with music, like I learned like 3 guitar chords, didn't do them for a year, came back better than the day I left. Kind of nutty how that works.
Yeah. Sometimes you need space. Just let it kind of sink in and then you just naturally feel it.
Yeah.
I think that's where your subconscious does most of the work. Because like consciously, you can only hold on to a couple things at a time. Some would even say you can only hold on to one thing at a time consciously. But I don't know if it's strength with subconscious or if it's just depends on the action. But I feel like at times my subconscious is working really hard and I'm like pretty hyped on it because I love, we've talked about this, when I put something on the back burner and it actually is cooking.
Yeah.
Like that's really sick when that happens. And I feel like, I don't know if that's like a weird metaphor or like it's easily understandable.
No, that makes sense.
But it's like, placing a thought aside and it grows. A little plant in the windowsill or however you want to call it. I think that's really cool. I don't know if it's ability you could work on and grow with, but I think everyone has a way of doing that.
Yeah. It's almost like, I was talking to Gregory about this a little bit off air, but there'll be things you'll get in life that are little nuggets of like truth where you're like, oh yeah, like this is kind of the thing. Like this really works for whatever you're doing for that moment, but it may not be immediately actionable at that time. And immediately trying to put it into action may not even be the right thing. But if you just back burner it and it's like, okay, I'm going to take that to heart and just sort of let that sit. I'm going to remember that idea, but not dwell on it. like your subconscious probably will be like, you get so much of a little like excited, positive vibe from having that initial thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, you put it on the back burner and your brain's like, we'll get better at this. Like you do your thing.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and this goes back around to like so many of the points I brought up is that you can leave things on that back burner too long and then your bell peppers are just burnt.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there's a time to pull it off that back burner, but I really like how you worded that there's excitement in putting it in the back burner, because sometimes I'm excited and I kind of forget why. Then I kind of search my thoughts. I'm like, oh, it's because I have that coming up. I wasn't even thinking about that.
Yeah.
But the general air of excitement was still on both my conscious and my subconscious.
Because when you put it on the back burner too, when you're doing something that then becomes useful for, I feel like that's when your brain kind of brings it up. Like you'll be doing it, a task or something, and your brain will slip it in that it's like,
hey, you had this idea a couple weeks ago. Like that would be really good right now.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, perfect. Like this is now it all makes sense because I have an application for it.
I think that's like a really I think that's kind of what an epiphany is in a lot of ways. I'm sure there's 30 other different ways you can epiphanize. But yeah, I think that's and that click is
so satisfying.
you're like, yo, no way.
Yeah. Because you need both parts. You need the idea and then you need it to come together with an actionable item to go like, wow, yeah, like this little thing I thought is like really working out now. It's the best. And then it locks it in going forward too. That's just like always an experience where you're like, oh yeah, like I sort of fundamentally understand something in a way I didn't before.
This is smooth brain, man.